Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Ancient Mathoms project, a collaboration between the White Tower blog and Card Talk, where we take a look at some of the older cards in the card pool and bring them up to modern standards. I'm one of your hosts, Onitson,
And I'm Grant Thompson, just along for the ride.
and today we have a special treat for you: the Ancient Mathoms versions of the cards from the Khazad-dum Deluxe Expansion. So, Khazad-dum was the first deluxe expansion of the game, and following in the pattern kind of established in the Shadows of Mirkwood cycle, it had some really excellent cards and some cards that just really haven't aged very well. And we're here to talk about those a little bit. So, Grant, if you'll lead us off with our discussion of the hero we've chosen to do a little bit
Yeah,
with.
yeah. It's as you can see from the picture, it's Wallen. He was good for dealing with the dwarves in the mine as he was. I mean, he took a bit of getting up so he could just one-shot things, but after you've dealt with the orcs in Khazad-dum and the cycle itself, the Dwarven cycle, he just seemed to fade out. He wasn't a hero people were necessarily going to build decks with him in. And I thought that was a shame because he had so much potential. Um, so what we've done is we ended up just altering his ability slightly. I mean, we tossed around several different ideas of how we could make Dwalin work. And after a while, we narrowed it down to this one, which he's got the same stat line. He's got the warrior trait, and then a response. After the Wallen participates in an attack that destroys an enemy, reduce your threat by 1. By 2 instead if the attack destroys an orc enemy, limit once per phase. So instead of having you, with an unexpected courage, killing everything with Dwalin and lowering your threat by 6 or 10, if you could even get that high, you you attack with them, you lower your threat, that's it. But it works on every enemy instead of just orc enemies, which I think makes them more viable in a lot more games.
I think so too. The early expansions of the game sometimes played around with cards that were only useful against certain kinds of enemies or certain kinds of locations, and I think that would have turned out better had they really leaned into it and given us a lot of cards that did that. But instead, they just kind of played around with it for the first cycle or two, gave us a few cards that did that sort of thing, and then just abandoned it for the rest of the lifetime of the game. And so, because there's not a clear, consistent pattern of, alright, include these cards if you're going to be up against orcs, include these cards if you're going to be up against spiders, etc., 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 we've decided just to make these old cards that are so restrictive that they only work on some kinds of enemies or locations, and broaden them to work on anything. But I do like that we managed to keep the fact that Dwalin's a little better if you kill an orc enemy.
Yeah, I think we'll have to stay true to the original design of Dwalin, which is what we're trying to do with the heroes. We're trying to stay true to their original design and concept, but still buff them out or in a little bit.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Alright, so on to our next card, the Leadership Event Ever Onward, 3 cost response. After the player's quest unsuccessfully, choose a player. That player does not raise his threat. That is an interesting card. I should say. I'm told that it's actually, or at least it actually can be, quite a good card in solo. Playing with single player, you spend the 3 resources, you say, I'm not going to raise my threat, and then you don't quest with anybody so that your entire board state is up and ready and available to deal with any enemies that are piling up on you, especially in boss fight situations where all you have to do is kill the boss and you don't need or necessarily want to be placing progress. Still, it's a very niche use case and is utterly useless in more than with more than one player in the game.
Yeah. I never really used Ever Onward, got to admit. I thought it was just a huge resource sink, and quite frankly, I always had something better to save me resources for or play. So it was a card that never got used with me.
So what we've done is made it more broadly playable again. Changed the cost to X, where X is the number of players in the game, and then after the players quest unsuccessfully, the players do not raise their threat. Um, that doesn't really take it out of the niche case when you still play this when you want to not have to send anybody to the quest, but it does mean that it's not quite so um, hard to play, and also it makes it useful in a multiplayer deck. More expensive for sure, and in a 4-player game it actually ends up costing you more than the original, but I feel like that's more than worth it for 4 players on the board, not sending anybody to the quest and still being able to handle all the enemies.
I agree. I mean, the cost of X in a solo game, you're spending 1 resource to not raise your threat from not committing anything. In a 2-player game, 2 resources, you can probably spare them. Leadership's resource acceleration machine. So, in that case, where both players, for a player that plays multiplayer like I do, that is more viable than the original to get out because it's not as massive resource sink as the first one, as the original, but it's also seeing both players. It's not limiting it just to one player.
Absolutely. I don't know that I've got anything else to say about this one, except that I'm excited to try to maybe get it on the table.
Yeah, okay, so next up we have the 4-cost ally, the Veteran of Kandukirian, with 0 willpower, 3 attack, 2 defense, 3 hit points. The Veteran of Nandahirian enters play with 1 damage on it. I've got to say, before the Ancient Mathoms, I never played with the Veteran of Nandahirian. That for that ability where he just enters play with the damage on him, it was like, well, why would I spend 4 on essentially a 2 hit point ally that got fairly decent attack, but that's about it. It was like, yeah, I think he's going to stay in the binder. That was my initial thoughts on the Veteran. How about yourself?
I've always liked the idea of the veteran. Thematically, I love this idea of this dwarf with old war wounds that never really healed up, just coming into play to help you on your quest. The problem is that at 4 cost, he's rough to get into play. Although 4 cost for 3 attack in tactics is not, well, okay, maybe it is a little awful in tactics, but at this point in the game, we didn't have anything better. Later on, we'd get 3 cost for 3 attack allies, and they'll just kind of displace this guy easily. But the problem with the Veteran of Nanduhirian is that only a little later on in the cycle, the ally Erebor Battermaster is released, and as a dwarf attacker, he just kind of takes the cake.
Well, yeah, that was before he was a rot.
I mean, even now he probably still does.
Well, yeah, fair enough. He's limited to +4 attack, I think it is now. But at one point, you could have each Erebor Battlemaster if you were in a Dwarf Swarm at like plus 11. I think I saw it at once.
Oh, goodness gracious. So, what we've done, we thought about maybe lowering the cost a little bit, thought about maybe doing a number of different things. We ended up boosting his defense to 3, making him a little bit more versatile, which is what you want to see out of these big high-cost allies. But also, we've given him an action, deal a damage to the Veteran of Nenduhirion to ready him. So you can attack for 3, deal a damage to him, ready up, attack for 3 again. And if you have some healing on the board, you can keep repeating that over and over and over again until you're getting a lot of use out of this ally. Still 4 cost for 3 attack, but with an ability like that, able to ready him over and over and over again if you need to, I really actually think that he's got a place. Maybe not necessarily in a Dwarf Swarm, but probably in a different kind of Dwarf deck.
Yeah, what this veteran puts me in mind of, this new version, is the Leadership Dwarf Soldier of Erebor, who costs 5, has 3 attack, 3 defense, but it also has Sentinel. But the difference, does it have Sentinel? I think it does. Just double check that before I continue on.
I definitely agree with the comparison, though. The stat line's very similar. The soldier costs 1 more, but in leadership, that 1 resource isn't that much of a difference.
Right. Okay. I've just pulled it up. It doesn't have Sentinel. That was me misremembering, but it's got the same hit points, the same stat line. It costs 1 more, but he has an action. Discard the top 3 cards of your deck to ready the Soldier of Erebor limit once per round. Where in tactics, the veteran's saying, well, just deal a damage to us and I'll get back to the fight. Instead of discarding your resources, whether it be actual physical resources or resources in your deck, your allies, events, attachments, etc., which is what the soldier's doing. And the comparison, that one major difference is the fact that the veteran comes into play with the damage already on him, but equally he does probably the same, if not a better job of what he does than the soldier.
I think so. Although I think in a dedicated mining deck, the Soldier of Erebor is a better bet because he's
in a dedicated mining deck, yes.
Yeah.
But the same could be said for a few other things that if you put it in a certain deck, it's going to be better than something else. But in a generalized deck, putting these side by side, I think the veteran takes the win here.
And I think that's as it should be. The tactics ally ought to be a better combat choice than the leadership one.
Yeah. And I mean, especially if you've got healing on the board, you can repeatedly ready to heal.
Absolutely. All right.
That's all I've got to say about the veteran. Do you want to move on into the next choice?
Sure. Ancestral Knowledge, a 1-cost lore event. Action, exhaust a dwarf character to place 2 progress tokens on the active location, 4 progress instead if it's underground or mountain location. This is an awful card, actually. I hate to say it. I hate to call cards awful. I really like to find niche cases for cards. I don't think there is one for this card. Because the problem is that placing progress on the active location is just about the least useful place to place progress.
Unless it's something like the Dreadful Gap.
Sure. There may be a few isolated cases where there's an active location you really, really, really want to get rid of. But I don't think that's enough to consistently take this card in your deck.
True. So what did we do to it?
Well, we made a very simple change. we just made it exhausted dwarf character to place 2 progress on any location. Now you can place progress on the staging area. 4 progress still if it's underground or mountain. That might be enough to actually knock out a dangerous location in the staging area. Now it's a decent dwarf-themed location control card.
Okay.
I don't have much else to say. Do you have anything to say about this?
Just that it helps with, obviously, as you said, location control. And if you're running Northern Trackers or Asphalot that we'll get later on in the series, it all helps to bring down some of the beefier locations. So even if you're not going into the underground or mountain areas, that 2 progress on any location could essentially be helpful.
Alright, let's talk about our last card here.
Okay, we're talking about the Boots from Erebor, the 0-cost neutral attachment attached to a dwarf or hobbit character. Limit 1 Boots of Erebor per game. Attached character gets +1 hit point. Now, when I joined the game, this card was, to me, it's a deck slot. I can find something better to put it in. It was 1 hit point. The only 2 really obvious choices, well, there was only 4 real obvious choices at that point. You had Gimli, Gloin, Frodo, and Bilbo were the ideal choices for this card. And for a deck slot, I thought I could find something better to put in instead of that to give them +1 hit point.
That kind of encapsulates my feelings too. I mean, it's not a bad card. 0 cost for 1 hit point isn't a bad trade. The problem is, every time you draw Boots from Erebor, you're not drawing something that, could have given you a lot more than 1 hit point.
Yeah, so in order to make it more viable, we kept the limited dwarf and hobbit in the 1 per character and attached gets 1 hit point, but we've also added a response. After Boots from Erebor are discarded from the top of your deck, you may put them into play, then draw a card. Now, that works ideally in dwarf mining decks. Not so much in the Hobbit deck, but I think the Hobbits are just using it for the hit point rather than the free attachment.
Agreed. And just the ability to draw a card in a mining deck, I think, is probably pretty useful. And more than anything else, this just increases the number of cards in a mining deck that are beneficial if they're discarded off the top of the deck. And that's something I like to see. There's only currently 2 cards, the Hidden Cache and the Eredluin Miner, and having a few more out there to choose from will do good things for the diversity of a dwarf mining deck, I think.
Yep. Okay, so I think that's all we've got to say on the matter.
I think so. So thanks for joining us, and keep an eye on the YouTube channel for our playthrough of the Khazad-dum Deluxe Box quests. Full disclosure, they were done before we recorded this video, and so you may see earlier drafts of these cards showing up in there, particularly the Boots from Erebor or the Veteran of Nenduhirion, but...
And I think Ever Onward as well.
That might imply that Ever Onward actually made it into one of the decks. I don't know that I did.
I think it got into the deck, I just don't think it hit the table.
That might be the case. Either way, regardless, thanks for watching, and we hope to see you soon to watch our previously recorded playthroughs of Into the Pit, the 7th level, and Flight from Moria. Until next time, happy questing.